Hello chess fans, this is Rick from Chess to Impress with the 6th video in the series of Bobby Fischer's perfect 11 out of 11 from the 1963-1964 US Championships, where he won all his games, which had never been done before and has never been done since. Fischer took part 8 times in the US Championships, he won them all. He's a joint record holder together with Samuel Reshevsky with 8 US Championship wins. You can see the first time he won, he was only 14 years old, and the last time was in the year 1966-1967. But what jumps out is that line there in red, the 1963-64 tournament, when Fischer won all his 11 games and finished 3.5 points ahead of his next rival. This is the table of that event. Fischer there on top, 11 out of 11, followed by Larry Evans, 3.5 points behind him. In this series we're covering all Fischer's 11 games. You can find the earlier videos in a link at the end of this video, and I will also put it up here. In the last video we saw Fischer beat Samuel Reshevsky with the black pieces. In round 6 he had the white pieces against Robert Steinmeier, who would finish in 11th place. With only 6 draws to his name, he was not able to win a game in this event. It is the 22nd of December 1963, as said. Fischer is sitting behind the white pieces, and as usual he opened with the e-pawn. His opponent Robert Henry Steinmeier played the Caro-Kann defense. Steinmeier was born on March 10th, 1927 and died on March 6th, 1988, a few days before his 61st birthday. Steinmeier was a lifelong resident of St. Louis in Missouri in the USA and was dominant in state and local chess from an early age, winning the state championship at 15. By that time his opponent was already twice US champion. Steinmeier played in 2 US championships in 1962 and in this event 63-64. We have the Caro-Kann. Fischer played d4, d5, knight c3, black took, knight takes and bishop f5, hitting the knight, and the knight went to g3. I'm taking Fischer's own comments in his great book My 60 Memorable Games, and I'm also using comments from this book, Learn from Bobby Fischer's Greatest Games, from FIDE master Eric Schiller. Fischer writes here that knight c5 is another move, and he says that on his simultaneous display tour following this US Championships, he experimented with this move. He said at least it's something to break the monotony. But in this important game he played the main move, knight g3, the best move in the position. Attacking the bishop, bishop went to g6, and now knight f3 developing. Here knight d7 is the main move, and Fischer explains that this move is made to prevent the knight coming to e5. That's why knight d7 is played at this time. If you play knight e5 now, then black wins a pawn with knight takes, d takes, and queen a5 check with a double attack. c3 and black wins a pawn. So that's why knight d7 is played in this position. But Steinmeier had prepared something. He played knight f6 instead. h4, h6, and now you can play knight e5. Fischer writes that white can try to exploit the order of black's opening moves with this move, but concludes that then white will not be able to get an opening advantage. So instead of knight e5 he played bishop d3. The bishops got swapped. e6, bishop d2 developing. There comes that knight finally to d7, and Fischer castled queenside. Queen c7, c4, and now black decided to castle queenside as well. Fischer gives bishop d6 as the alternative, attacking the knight on g3 with 2 pieces. If you play that knight to e4, then there is bishop f4, and Fischer says this leads to immediate simplifications. A pair of bishops and a pair of knights will be swapped. These pieces. After bishop d6 attacking that knight, you can also go to e2 with the knight, explains Fischer, but then black castles king b1, and then there is e5, and this is also equal, according to Fischer. So all that after c4 and then bishop d6. But as said, Steinmeier decided to castle queenside on the 12th move. Bishop c3. Fischer says now black can no longer force the exchange of the bishops. Fischer wants to keep the game as complex as possible. Here bishop d6 should have been played according to Fischer, but queen f4 check was the move, played by Steinmeier. Let me give you a quote from Grandmaster Larry Evans in the preface in the My 60 Memorable Games book. Steinmeier's concept beginning with 13 queen f4 check is both subtle and novel. The only trouble is that it meets with a smashing refutation. Instead of simplifying, as Steinmeier hopes, his variation enmeshes him in complications. And Fischer calls this the start of a faulty concept. Bishop d6 is better. Fischer explains that he would have achieved an equal position starting with this move. But queen f4 check was played, king stepped aside, and now you can go back to c7. Fischer says that black still had time to back out with this move, but that's a very difficult move to make psychologically. Steinmeier keeps going down the line of his preparation. After king b1, he did not retreat the queen, he played knight c5. And you cannot take that knight because then your queen is hanging. After knight c5, Fischer dropped back with the queen is attacked on d3, and he played queen c2. And he writes, now there's no turning back for black. Steinmeier will have to keep going with his preparation, which will lead him down the path of self-destruction. He played knight c to e4. Bishop a5 was played in an earlier game, but Fischer plays a much stronger move. He found the move knight e5 and calls this a clear refutation. The queen's retreat is cut off and the ancient weakness of black's f7 square is etched more sharply than ever. And Grandmaster Evans writes, this is the nail in the coffin, after which black's queen can no longer be extricated without fatal loss of material. Indeed, this queen looks very awkward now on f4. It has no squares, it is almost checkmated. What to do here? Fischer gives a number of variations. He gives knight takes g3, and then white recaptures. Queen takes, black has won a pawn, but then there is rook d3 attacking the queen. And after queen f4 there is rook f3. You can still play the queen to e4, the queen is not trapped yet, but then there is that knight takes f7 move. The weakness of the f7 square, and it's forking both rooks. White wins material. What else is there after knight e5? Fischer also gives the option knight takes c3 check. Then it's important that you take with the b pawn. And now there are a few variations. You can play knight g4. But then there is knight h5 hitting the queen. And if you take on f2 with the queen, then knight takes g4 wins a piece. The knight is unprotected. And if after knight h5 you play queen f5, then white swaps the queens and takes on f7 again with that fork. Again, white wins material. One more variation, if after knight takes c3 check, b takes c3, black plays rook g8 to make sure knight takes f7 is not a fork. Then there is rook d3, and you have to make a square for the queen, so h5 gives the queen the h6 retreating square, but then rook f3, the queen hides, but then knight takes f7 is a fork after all. Nice variations given by Fischer. One last variation after knight e5. If you take on f2 straight away, then the knight on e4 is hanging. So what to do after knight e5? Steinmeier took on f2 with the knight, and Fischer writes, what else? There is nothing else. But here is the last move of the game already. We're on move 17. Fischer played rook d to f1 and Steinmeier resigned. Fischer writes, this is probably what Steinmeier overlooked when he went into this whole mess. Is this position resignable? Yes, it is. Let's look at a few variations. You can take on g3, take that piece. Then there is rook takes f2, which is threatening rook f3, which would trap the queen. So you have to play queen e3. And now you can take on f7 straight away with that fork that we've seen a number of times. But Fischer gives in his book rook e2 first, queen to f4, and then he takes on f7. And Fischer says this wins at least the exchange. What a game. The ease with which Bobby Fischer refuted Black's prepared opening idea is another sign of his brilliance. Fischer now had 6 wins out of 6 games, more than halfway on his way to the perfect tournament. The tournament was now paused for a few days for the holidays, and 4 days later, on the 26th of December, Fischer would have the black pieces against William Addison. And that is what the next video is about. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, please subscribe to the Chess to Impress channel, and please leave a comment. I will read them all and I will reply to them all. If you like this video, it would be great if you could share it on social media by clicking the share button on YouTube. You can find me on Instagram, on Twitter and on Facebook. This is Rick for Chess to Impress. Thank you for watching.